We're flying with KLM via Amsterdam to EZE on the map, Buenos Aires. It will take almost 14 hours. Next day, another 3.5-hour flight will take us to the tip of Argentina, and finally it's 2 days by sea to the Antarctic Peninsula. When we left home, it was a grey, damp winter. Here in Buenos Aires, it's summer. In fact, there's a plague of mosquitoes about. We're staying here at the Hilton Hotel for just one night before the early flight to Ushuaia tomorrow. Just around the corner is the Rio Dique, a tributary of the Rio de la Plata. A lovely area, especially on this Saturday afternoon in the sunshine. But we're taking the Grey Line bus for the 3.5-hour tour of Buenos Aires. Not far away is the Rio de la Plata, the widest river in the world. In fact, it's impossible to see across to Uruguay on the other side. It's very windy, but that didn't stop us getting bitten by mosquitoes. It was such a problem that the chemists had run out of bite cream. So back to the hotel because we need to be in bed by 7 p.m. It's 2:45 in the morning and we're just about to leave the Hilton Hotel, having been up since 1 o'clock. We're taking the flight at 6 o'clock to Ushuaia. From Buenos Aires, we're flying south to the very tip of Argentina, Ushuaia. Hurtigruten, with whom we'll be sailing to Antarctica, have chartered this plane with a very appropriate logo on the tail fin. Soon after we took off, the sun was rising, and this A320 Airbus will take 3.5 hours to reach our destination. Now, because of the early flight, and embarkation isn't until 3 o'clock, they're taking us to the Tierra del Fuego National Park. There's a sign there, Malvinas is sovereignty. That's a bit worrying. Parque Nacional Tierra del Fuego. Our first stop was Ensenada Bay, where there are lovely views, and the end of the world post office, which was run by a rather bad-tempered chap. He went mad when a lady tried to borrow his stamping machine. I bought the card on the left, and it took 4 weeks to get home to the UK. And this is Rocco Lake. I'm standing in Argentina, and across the lake is Chile, where there is an extinct volcano. But it's time to move on. In fact, our next stop will be the last in the Tierra del Fuego National Park at La Botella Bay. There's a lovely boardwalk to take you to the bay, and whilst we visitors are taking pictures, the locals relax. This lady is drinking mate, a herbal infusion. Nearby, these are upland geese, who enjoy eating the feathered tops of the grass. Well, it's nearly embarkation time, so we're leaving the national park to drive back to Ushuaia for another quick photo stop. Our guide told me about the nearby flags. On the left, the national park, with the Argentinian flag in the middle, and on the right, the Peruvian flag, because Peru helped Argentina in the Malvinas War. This statue from 2022 commemorates 40 years since the war. Mother, I'm going to the island. I don't know who to fight. Maybe I'll fight. I'll resist. Or maybe I'll die there. There's no talk of the Falkland Islands here. It's Isla Malvinas. Nearby is Olivia Mountain, with a vicious, harpoon-like looking summit. Ushuaia is known as the end of the world, but it's the gateway to Antarctica. At last it's time to drive down to the port, where it's starting to rain. This is the Roald Amundsen, and in a couple of hours' time we're setting sail for Antarctica. After embarkation we went up to deck 9. Ooh, that's a bad sign. To find our suite. Out on the balcony, there's Sapphire Princess with over 2,500 passengers. We can carry just 500, but there are only 381 on this cruise. And there's a stark reminder that you must take the muster station drill very seriously, especially for the uninhabited part of the world to which we're going. So we're sailing out of Ushuaia. This is the sail away. There's no champagne, there's no balloons, there's no great music or festivities. We're just slipping quietly away down the channel and towards Drake's Passage. Good luck. And let's hope we won't need that. I think we'll be going to more remote areas than they can get to. Leaving Ushuaia, it will take 2 days to cross the Drake Passage, sailing south towards the Antarctic Peninsula. There's someone in the pool already. Anyway, it's time for dinner. This is one of 3 restaurants on board. There are no printed menus. The menu is on the Hurtigruten app on your mobile. We're sailing down the Beagle Channel, and tonight we'll start crossing the 500-mile Drake Passage, traditionally the scourge of mariners, where the South Pacific tangles with the South Atlantic and the Southern Ocean. 1 in 4 crossings will encounter turbulent seas. Fortunately, during our first night, we were lucky. And talking to the head waiter this morning, he says this is flat calm. The map of the cruise was the start of this morning's Life on Board lecture. Hurtigruten is a member of the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, so they adhere strictly to the rules of the park. For instance, not taking food ashore, not bending or lying down to take pictures, and keeping 15 meters away from wildlife. And the vacuuming. More about that later. After that, it was time for a nice coffee in the Explorer's Lounge, followed by a game of Rummikub, though with the constant swell of the ship we did have to have a lie down afterwards. And by then the fog had come down, nothing to see but sea. The main focus of the afternoon was biosecurity vacuuming, where we had to present our outdoor clothing to be vacuumed. so we didn't take anything ashore to contaminate Antarctica. And outside it's still very calm. Let's hope it continues. We're trying the more informal Fredheim restaurant this evening. Throughout the night it was still quite calm, but I don't think we'll be doing any sunbathing today. Breakfast is in the main restaurant called Orne. After this, Oscar Ferreira, the ship's photographer, is giving a lecture on how to use your smartphone to take great photos. His advice was really good, and it was an excellent lecture. As we cross the Drake Passage, it's rough enough to make some people seasick, but for the crew, it's unusually calm. As they say, Drake Lake. Then we attended the activity room in the Science Centre, where we decorated our Hurtigruten water bottles. But next we had a job to do. We've just been to be fitted with our Hurtigruten rubber boots, ready for the ice and snow which lies ahead. My goodness, these are so heavy, it's unbelievable. And getting them on is one thing, but getting them off, oh my goodness. Tonight's briefing confirmed that tomorrow we would sail along the Lamar Channel and visit Port Charcot, named after the first French Antarctic expedition in 1903. The timetable will take us in groups, first cruising and later landing, since to protect the environment, only 100 people are allowed ashore at one time. The next day we woke to heavy rain, but this is our first sighting of an iceberg. It's much colder out here than it looks, my goodness, and it's chucking it down, but there you go. This is Antarctica. After breakfast, we went back to our suite to admire the views. It's amazing to realise that 90% of an iceberg is below the waterline. Just imagine the colossal size of this one. In the Explorer Lounge, it's time for a quick coffee as we enter the Lamar Channel. This is one of the most picturesque parts of this area, so I joined the photographers at the bow. Our first sighting of penguins was in the water. And now we've arrived at Port Charcot, a bay at the north end of Booth Island, where our original landing site is occupied by a colony of Gentoo penguins. So the expedition leaders are going out to find a nearby landing site and then mark the route with red flags which we must follow. Our group, the Beluga Whales, will take the landing sometime later, after the Zodiac Scenic Cruise. Looking at others being helped over the rocks, it's no wonder we had to pass an online medical fitness check before we embarked on this trip. The snow is coloured by a mixture of vomit, how penguins feed their chicks, and penguin poo, which makes a scent that belies their cuteness. Penguins often appear clumsy on land and are best in the water, but it seems that they wait for someone else to take the first plunge. Before we go out on the Zodiacs, we have to dress appropriately. I'm already wearing the thermal underwear and my thick jumper. Having fought my way into the waterproof trousers and put the thermal socks on, it's now time for the heavy Hurtigruten boots. The trousers go inside the boots, but the waterproofs need to go over the top on the outside. I now have my North Face coat on and over the top the compulsory Hurtigruten jacket with the ship ID card and the beluga whale group tag. Then it's the snood around the neck, the woolly hat, 2 pairs of gloves, and I'm ready to go. Well, that took about half an hour, but soon we were out on the water. And the guide in the next boat would tell us about the ice formations. I could feel rain in the air, and the seas getting rougher. Unfortunately, we were sitting at the bow where the water came over and the rain poured down as we raced back to the ship. That was an absolute blooming nightmare. The water was coming over the boat. I was sat at the bow end and the water was coming up like this. We got absolutely soaked. I certainly know what the water tastes like. Very salty. The experience reminded me of this book which I'm reading at the moment. So we hung up our wet coats and took advantage of the heated bathroom floor for the rest. We were far too wet to go out again on the shore excursion, and due to the uncertain weather tomorrow, tonight's briefing is cancelled. Instead, we settled for dinner, a nice glass of wine, and an early night to the accompaniment of cracking ice outside. Next morning it was raining again, as we called briefly on the US Palmer Research Station to help them exchange their station leaders. They study ocean and climate systems and have a research ship and helicopter landing pad. Then we had our first sighting of whales, 2 magnificent humpbacks. As with viewing all wildlife, it's just a matter of luck, being in the right place at the right time. At 10:15, we attended the briefing to tell us about today's programme. We're going to Demoy Point on Wainiki Island. The landing site is round the corner in Dorian Bay, and we'll see the Argentinian refuge hut and Demoy hut, the British one. And if you fancy a dip, the MS Roald Amundsen Beach Club will be open. We'll be leaving the ship to a timetable for each group, and the times are rotated daily to ensure that everyone gets the same experience. As the weather has settled somewhat, the kayaking group can now go out, but for the overnight campers, last night was postponed, as is tonight. Maybe they'll be lucky tomorrow night. We've now arrived at the bay, where the Zodiac boats will take us to the landing site. Some kayakers are leaving the expedition launch, then we are helped into the Zodiac. I thought the weather had improved, but it can change in a moment out here. It's going to be a wet landing and an uphill walk. There's the Argentinian refuge hut and the Demoy hut, built as a shelter for scientists making the journey further south. Extreme weather could mean waiting for a plane for days or even weeks. So it meant hunkering down in the bunk room with nothing but a simple stove, tinned food, and the possessions you arrive with. The hut was used by the British Antarctic Survey until 1993, but today it's a protected historical site in one of the remotest places on Earth. Behind me is our ship, and just to the right is the penguin colony. As always, the expedition team have marked the walking route with red flags. Penguins are certainly more graceful in the water than they are on land, where they seem to struggle a bit. And look at this one feeding her chick with regurgitated food. It was quite a walk with the heavy boots, but certainly worth it. Oh, hello. Someone's chosen to take the Antarctic plunge and, oh, maybe not, it's a bit chilly. But you've got to have a selfie with your woolly hat on. Actually, there was a nurse standing by. And now the problem of getting back into the Zodiac.
May I suggest that I...
Yeah, go on.
There you go. Special treatment.
A gentleman.
Susanna, I can't get up either. Will you help me in as well?
She made it. But it's even quite tricky for the youngsters.
That's right. Thank you. Okay.
Right.
So it's back to the ship. It's time now for a snooze, I think, after all that exercise. After leaving Damoy Point this evening, we'll journey overnight to cruise Paradise Bay in the morning. Sounds nice. Then we move on to Orne Harbour for Zodiac cruising and a moderate climb to a vantage point. After the briefing, we passed Port Lockroy, where we can't stop for fear of spreading their bird flu. We awoke next day to the sight of Atlas Ocean Voyages World Traveller. She carries just 196 passengers. It does look brighter today. Let's hope it continues. We soon arrived in Paradise Bay, where the ship employs the dynamic positioning system, so there's no need to drop anchor and damage the ocean floor. It's so quiet and peaceful here, watching mother and baby whales together. I think this is very aptly named Paradise Bay. On the way out, we passed González Videla, the Chilean research station, now a museum and home to many penguins, as you can see. We're now bound for Orne Harbour, and Angie's been trying out her photographic skills with the mobile following the lecture 3 days ago. This is the stunning result. There's another cruise ship coming into Paradise Bay, the luxurious French Ponance La Barrielle. We're about to turn into Orne Bay, but there's a problem. There is an airport-style booking system, and another cruise ship is in the bay running late. so we'll just have to wait. Ah, it's Atlas's World Traveller again. Orne Bay was used as a safe anchorage by whaling ships in the early 20th century. The harbour is ringed with glaciers and steep peaks. We're going out by Zodiac to see the wildlife on the rocks and tour the bay before our landing trip some hour and a half later. The continent's inaccessibility, coupled with weather conditions so harsh that life shouldn't exist here, has always been part of Antarctica's mystique. So this is a gentoo penguin, and this is a chinstrap penguin. Look at the line round its neck. Leaving the cliffs, the Zodiac boatman took us to explore the bay. When we stopped, he said you can never predict where ice carving will occur. This seal's making himself comfortable on the ice. As we looked across to the landing site, a message came through that we'd overstayed our time, and so we were called back to the ship. Ooh, I wondered what would happen if we hit a big piece of ice. Fortunately, everyone and the boat was okay, and we made it safely back to the ship. But our boatman did look a bit shaken. Now you might think that the view behind me is a mural. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not, because we're in Orne Harbour in Antarctica. And there's the landing site, leading to a long zigzag path right to the top of the mountain. Even with the walking poles, we decided we simply couldn't manage it, and several people fell over. Leaving Orne Bay, there is the spectacular Spigot Peak. Antarctica is the highest, driest, windiest, coldest, and surely the most beautiful continent in the world. With views like this, having dinner is a delight. And as dusk falls, there's good news for those who have paid to camp outdoors. The weather will be good enough tonight for their experience of a lifetime. We could just see the lights from the campsite at Kerr Point on Ronge Island. Next day, we would sail between Brabant and LeConte Island towards Spurt Island. Other ships seem to be smaller than ours. The White Continent is an area of captivating beauty, and as we sailed gently along, I was keen to talk to Christian. So Christian, you and Jocelyn went out for the night camping in Antarctica.
What happened was we went out on our Zodiac rafts and we landed on the beach, and it was dark at this point. It was dark. It was cold, obviously, and we put our things in a polka, a sled, and we, carried those. We pulled them to our campsite, and at that point, we set up our tent in pitch black. We had a headlamp, but it was very dark. But we managed to get our tent up, and from that point on, we ended up spending the night on the continent.
How near together were the tents?
The tents were actually pretty close together. They sectioned off an area because there was actually a concern about some seals that were sleeping on the ice shelf.
Somebody told me that after you'd set the tents up, the ship pulled away.
Well, once that ship went away, there was nothing else out there. It was just us, just our row of tents, and a light from a sailboat that was off in the distance. But other than that, it was dark.
Did you get any sleep?
We actually did sleep decently well for a couple hours.
And what about the bathroom?
Now, normally it would only be for emergency situations, but you know, some of us had to go anyway. And when we went to the bathroom, it's this dugout little ditch almost, and they had these two plastic seats set up that were the toilets, and these little almost like canisters. One was for trash and one was just filled with toilet paper, and this small little just this little toilet in the ground that you had to squat really low to use.
Was it something that you've always wanted to do?
Camping, yes. The camping part, yes. It was an amazing experience. You know, not a lot of people get to say that they camped on the Antarctic continent, but it was a really cool, once-in-a-lifetime experience.
And would you do it again?
I would do it again for sure. Definitely.
Thanks very much, Christian. And this was Jocelyn's take on the experience.
I know it's gonna hurt watching your footsteps start, so love me for right now before you leave me.
And the ship's photographer took this iconic picture. But back to today and deck watch at the bow of the ship. 1 minute it was perfectly clear, and the next sea fog appeared. But it soon lifted, and the expedition team were preparing the Zodiacs for the afternoon's cruising sessions in Spurt Bay. Just look at the colour of the sea. And we're about to pass through a rock arch. On the way back, we were given a special view of the Roald Amundsen. Overnight, we're sailing north to Whalers Bay, where the entrance to the bay is only 500 meters wide and known as Neptune's Bellows.
Please make your way to deck 3. Thank you.
This is Whalers Bay on Deception Island, and it's formed as a caldera, which is the inside of a volcano which has collapsed. And as you can see, the ground is still warm. Behind me are the remains of a Norwegian whaling station which operated between 1912 and 1931. Now it's all become a pretty grim mess. Why don't they clear it up? Because it's an historic site. The marked out route was a walk along the beach and then uphill to a viewpoint overlooking the bay. And now for the walk up to the ridge. The higher you got, the steeper the path. And the loose gravel meant that it was quite slippery, even with 2 walking poles. At the top was a rope to keep you away from the sheer drop on the other side. The view from the top over the bay was pretty amazing. I was so hot by the time I got down that I could have done with a dip. Coming down over the loose gravel was so difficult that I detected a sense of relief as we trudged back to the Zodiacs. Soon we too would be sailing out of Whalers Bay through the narrow Neptune's Bellows. And then our group was invited to the bridge to meet the captain. He talked to us about the ship, saying that if necessary she can sail through 1 meter's depth of ice. To avoid wildlife, they simply look down to see where the photographers are pointing their lenses. The officer of the watch works 4 hours on and 4 hours off, steering the ship with a tiny joystick. And if the Drake Passage is rough, they can sail in a zigzag pattern to reduce the effect. There's no briefing tonight, because we're leaving the Antarctic Peninsula to sail for 2 days north, back across the Drake Passage, bound for the Falkland Islands. 2 days at sea. Time to read a book. Perhaps catch up with home. Go for a coffee or have something stronger. Relax. Maybe even go to the Explorer Lounge for the towel folding demonstration. But best of all was having the time to play Rummikub with our new friends Uta and Rainer from Germany. The map on the TV in our room monitors our progress. And of course, there was lots of time to eat. On the second evening, the briefing focused on the Falkland Islands and Stanley, our next port of call. We'd opted for the 10:20 Community Walk A, though we would have some regrets about not taking the 10:05 option to Volunteer Point. These were the pictures of the king penguins taken by those who went to the colony at Volunteer Point. Surely a wonderful sight, but it would have meant a 2-hour drive over rough ground to get there. The following morning, at last we could see land, and Stuart and Leslie had gone up on deck for some fresh air. It's very windy indeed. Thank goodness for the stabilisers on our ship. Today we're lucky, because sometimes it's too rough to land on the Falklands. Once in the bay, our ship will use its GPS, engines and thrusters to hold its position. Then we're going ashore by tender, the ship's lifeboats, rather than in the Zodiacs. The tenders can hold up to 100 people, though there will be less as we go ashore. Stanley is the capital of the Falkland Islands. There are 3,720 residents and 490,000 sheep. On our community walk it was freezing cold. Thank goodness for the Hurtigruten jacket over my North Face coat, plus the hat, snood and gloves. These are the Jubilee Villas, dating from 1887. And this is Christchurch Cathedral, with the whalebone arch which was erected in 1933 to mark 100 years of British administration. This is Stanley's supermarket, and then there's the post office, and there's even a prison here, though it's never very busy. The Dockyard Museum was very interesting. Many visitors want to know about the Falklands War in 1982, when the islands were occupied by Argentinian troops for 10 weeks. HMS Sheffield was hit by an Exocet missile, killing 20. The Argentinian General Belgrano was torpedoed and sunk, killing 320. After successfully repelling the Argentinians, cheering crowds welcome HMS Hermes home to Portsmouth. Under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's leadership, there was a quick response and a swift victory. When I asked our guide if the islanders were worried that Argentina might invade again, she said no, Argentina can't afford it, they're broke. There's even more wind and rain now as we make our way back to the ship. And there's the last tender coming back. We're sailing overnight to an island off the West Falklands, Saunders Island. It looked like it might be the roughest night so far, and so in the middle of the night I recorded my thoughts in the bathroom. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and as we move from East Falkland Islands to West Falkland Island, we're experiencing what they might call the Drake Shake. Apart from the rhythmic rocking and rolling of the boat, every now and again there's this sort of shaking motion, which is really a little bit disturbing. When we woke, Angie said it was amazing that we hadn't been thrown out of bed. Then the captain announced that they were assessing the wind. We stopped near Saunders Island, then slowly moved away to Plan B, as they call it, the more sheltered West Point Island. This would mean a longer hike leading to a rocky cliff, which serves as a breeding ground for black-browed albatrosses and rockhopper penguins. So, much later in the day than originally planned, we arrived for an onshore briefing to find it would be a 2-kilometre walk each way. We were lucky that we managed to get a lift in a Land Rover, whilst those used to hiking uphill carried on. Then it was downwards towards the cliff face. One of the 2 local farmers took us over the bumpy ground. When we arrived, there was a slippery downward path to a viewing point. Those who made it were rewarded with a sight of rockhopper penguins and albatrosses flying around the cliffs. The lady farmer said they enjoyed life here, with the weekly supply ship from Stanley bringing provisions and taking away the wool from their sheep. They also have a tiny landing strip. Back on the ship, it was the usual mandatory boot washing. Steak and chips for dinner tonight, I think. Overnight, it's a short journey across to New Ireland. Next day was a pretty grim start, as the expedition leaders went out to plot our landing route. Later it brightened up, and we could see another long walk up a hillside, so after some debate we decided not to go. It gave us more time to relax and play more games of Rummikub. It's 2 more days at sea, back to Ushuaia, and we've got the captain's farewell dinner party to look forward to tomorrow. And the next day we started the task of packing, which took quite a while. Then we returned our boots. I'll be very glad not to see them again. In the lecture theatre, we received disembarkation information. What a pleasure to have several final games with our friends. The science rooms are empty and the equipment's packed away, for it's nearly the end of the voyage. Quite sad, really. Then we all gather together for the captain's farewell.
So you are ready to go?
Oh, no.
Should we just turn around and go back there again? It's been a pleasure to have you on board. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope you have a lot of memories.
Then we said thank you to the crew.
Take care from all of us and let's go.